Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by. Welcome to the webinar today, brought to you by ComplyRight. Live, Posting Compliance Audit, is your business at risk? Please note that during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, April 14th, 2016. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I am your host today. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar, and welcome. I'd like to review a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you would like to ask a question, simply use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any time. If you have any audio trouble, please message us in the chat box and we will assist you. Please ensure your speakers are turned on with the volume up. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to our speaker today, Ashley Kaplan. Ashley is a senior employment law attorney for Poster Guard and has been practicing labor and employment law for almost 20 years. Ashley oversees the teams responsible for researching all the posting laws and developing Poster Guard services to meet our customers' diverse needs. Ashley has represented employers of all sizes in all areas of labor and employment law, including claims relating to civil rights, family leave issues, wage and hour matters, immigration, and breach of contract. As a special offer to our attendees today, Ashley has agreed to provide a complimentary consultation about your specific posting compliance needs. If you are interested, please indicate that in the chat box and we will contact you to set it up. And without further ado, here's Ashley Kaplan. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to share some important information about labor law posting compliance, starting with why it matters, or the risks of noncompliance, and then moving into the specifics of what it takes to get it right. So today's presentation will take you through all the steps you need to get into full compliance when it comes to posting compliance. We're going to cover 10 steps that will serve as a complete labor law posting audit for your business. So before we jump into the audit, let's back up and start with some basics about posting compliance in general and why it's important to get it right. So first of all, as most of you probably already know, labor law posting compliance is not a choice. It's not optional. These posters are mandatory for every employer in the U.S. And in most cases, the posters are required even if you only have 1 or 2 employees. There are some exceptions where the requirements kick in at maybe 5 employees or 15 employees. There's the FMLA, federal posting, that's required if you have 50 or more. But for the most part, these posters that we're talking about today apply to every business with at least 1 employee. So compliance isn't optional, and there are actually some pretty serious consequences for failing to comply. In the federal statutes, in the statutes for the general federal postings, the government is authorized to fine up to $17,000 per location for posting violations. And that could be for missing posters or outdated posters. On a state level, the fines are typically between $100 and $1,000 per violation, but they're really all over the place because each posting has its own laws, its own enforcement, and its own fines attached to it. So, that's just a range. Typically, the state fines that I see are, around $600 or $700 per location. But the real danger with posting violations is related to employee lawsuits and employee disputes that relate to the laws that are covered in these posters, like a lawsuit, for example, alleging discrimination or unpaid overtime or even an FMLA violation. And there are a few different ways that posting compliance comes into play with employee lawsuits. The first, and I think the biggest, the most significant, is when it comes to the statute of limitations. And the statute of limitations can be an employer's best friend because it's the defense that allows you to have a claim stricken or dismissed because it was filed too late. It also cuts off damages that are filed outside that window of time. So as an employment lawyer, I can tell you from experience how important this defense is and how many times I've used it to get claims dismissed or at least to minimize a client's damages. So just to illustrate, the statute of limitations, for example, for a federal discrimination claim is 300 days. For a Fair Labor Standards Act case, like for overtime or misclassification, it's 2 years. So typically, if you get a claim from a former employee or an existing employee for a violation and it occurred outside of that time period, you can move to have that claim dismissed and avoid all the legal fees and the potential liability for the claims in the lawsuit, even if there was a violation, just because it was filed too late. However, if you have a posting violation, missing or outdated posters, courts have begun to publish more and more decisions saying that if an employee didn't have proper notice of his or her rights, the statute of limitations is extended or tolled, and you cannot use it as a defense to cut off claims or to cut off liability. So we've actually seen cases where normally an old claim would have been dismissed, where the court allowed the plaintiff to pursue the claim, and it ended up in a six-figure judgment just because the posters were not up on the wall. And another way that posting compliance comes into play with lawsuits is as evidence of bad faith. And all of the different federal employment laws that are represented on these posters have different standards where the concept of good faith or bad faith can affect your potential liability, the employer's potential liability in a lawsuit. So, where a showing of good faith can reduce or even eliminate your liability, and a showing of bad faith could inflate your damages. I've seen bad faith standards severely inflate damages that an employer is on the hook for. So it really depends on the law and the legal standard. Like under Title VII for discrimination claims, when we talk about good faith or bad faith, an employer can be assessed punitive damages. Under the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, and the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, you can be assessed double damages, or what are called liquidated damages. So under these various legal tests, courts look at a variety of factors to determine if an employer acted in good faith or in bad faith. Typically, things like, did the employer have written policies in place on compliance matters? Did the employer properly train managers and employees? How did the company respond, or generally, how does the company respond to complaints or problems? And really just, the general attitude or culture toward compliance. And we've seen a lot of cases lately where the courts are considering posting compliance as one of those factors. So needless to say, it's important to make sure you're on the right side of the law when it comes to posting compliance. And just to sum it up, posting compliance is really your first line of defense, whether it's a government audit or a private employee lawsuit. And it's simply just not worth the risk to cut corners knowing the potential liability that's involved. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead and jump into the labor law posting audit. But first we have a quick poll or survey question. So if you could just take a moment and quickly respond to this question so we can just kind of get a feel for where everyone is in terms of your confidence level about compliance. So if you could just go ahead and answer, how confident are you that your labor law postings are compliant and complete? Okay, well that's better than I expected. So half of you are confident, and about 17–18% are extremely confident, so that's good news. For those of you who aren't, I had assumed that would be more on the lines of not confident or somewhat confident given the title of the webinar and your interest in attending. So it's great that you're here to learn more. And for those of you who aren't that confident, I hope and I'm sure that you're going to walk away today with all the tools and knowledge you need to get there. So, okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the posting requirements and what it takes to get it right. And the first step, like I said, we're going to go through 10 steps. The first step in auditing your posting compliance is making sure you have all of the required postings. So we're going to start with the basics. We're going to start with federal posting requirements. There are 6 mandatory postings required by federal law, and each one of these posters covers a different federal law or in some cases multiple laws. So first there's the EEOC posting, which gives employees information about their rights under various discrimination laws, like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Next, there's the what we refer to as the minimum wage poster, and this covers all the major provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act, including minimum wage, overtime, and also child labor, federal child labor requirements. Then there is the USERRA posting, and that stands for the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And that one goes into military leave rights and some other protections for service members and veterans. Then there's the OSHA posting, and that one lets employees know their basic rights under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The fifth one listed here is the EPPA poster, and that stands for the Employee Polygraph Protection Act. And yes, this one is mandatory for every employer, even if you don't use lie detector tests. And we get that question a lot, but it is a mandatory poster for everyone. And finally, there's the Family and Medical Leave Act posting. And all of these postings, one thing they have in common is they're designed by the government agencies to give employees information about their legal rights, the responsibilities of their employers, your responsibilities, and also how to file complaints with the appropriate government agencies if an employee believes that his or her rights have been violated. Okay, on a state level, there are additional labor law posters that are required, and depending on what state you're in, this can add up to 15 additional posters. So that means, we've talked about the 6 federal ones, that means up to 21 postings, depending on your state, just to comply with basic federal and state posting requirements. And this area of compliance, the state law posting compliance, is becoming more complex and difficult to manage over the years, because more and more laws are being passed on a state level giving employees protection in employment. And with each new law, there's a potential poster update or a new poster being issued. A lot of these laws are brand new, and so brand new posters are coming out, making that number grow. Right now it's up to 15, and just a few years ago it was only 10 or 11. But the state posters do vary from state to state. No two states are alike. And they cover topics, typically minimum wage, fair employment, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, rules around smoking in the workplace, paid sick leave, child labor, and then some new areas that we're starting to see, like human trafficking, expanded family care rights, and also electronic cigarettes, smoking in the workplace. And something that a lot of businesses are not aware of is that there is not a one-stop shop for free government posters. Each poster covers different state laws, and they are issued by different state agencies. So in one state alone, there can be up to 9 different agencies that you have to go to get all of the required posters just for basic federal and state compliance. So while the agencies do provide PDFs that you can download for free on most cases of these posters, they're on the government websites, you have to go to each government website, and you have to know which agencies you're looking for to get all of the required postings. There's not just one central place where you can get all the posters you need. There are maybe 1 or 2 states that I've looked at lately that have done a pretty good job of it. They don't have the federal posters, but they have done a pretty good job of working with sister agencies, but it's very rare. So it actually takes quite a bit of know-how and resources to get everything straight, to get everything that you need for basic compliance. And it's one thing if you just have one location to worry about or just one state, but for multi-site employers operating in multiple states, there's actually, across the nation, there are more than 370 different mandatory posters that are required on a combined federal and state level. And the posters are issued by about 175 different agencies. So, okay, before we move on, I want to point out a common mistake I see all the time. A lot of businesses that try to handle posting compliance on their own aren't aware that there are multiple posters required from multiple different agencies. And they think that they have everything they need if they just visit their state's Department of Labor site. That's a really common mistake. Like I said, you can get some of the posters that way, but not all of them. But a bigger mistake that I see all the time, especially with small businesses, is when the business relies on their workers' comp carrier for posting compliance. Your workers' comp carrier typically will just give you the state workers' comp poster, and then same thing, maybe the posters from the State Department of Labor, but it is not everything you need for compliance. So it's important that everyone understands that. This is just a quick visual showing how different the posters are from state to state. In one state you might only need 9 or 10 total posters. In another you'll have twice as many requirements to worry about. And of course the laws described in the posters are completely different as well. State laws are all over the place. When it comes to minimum wage, they have different wage rates. Family and medical leave laws are different. Child labor laws are different. And even the smoking rules that apply to businesses are different state to state. This chart goes state by state, and in the first column on the left, it shows how many posters, or how many individual postings are required, including federal and state postings for each state. So, it goes up, like I said, it can be up to 21 postings. In the second column on the right, it shows how many different agencies are responsible for issuing those postings in each state. So this is just a good, really quick self-audit tool. So at a quick glance, you can see how many different postings should be up on the wall at your posting stations. Obviously, in today's webinar, we're not going to be able to go through every poster required in every state, but we do have a great self-audit tool, a posting audit tool that we're providing for all of you attending today. You should be able to see the link to the posting audit tool right there on your screen in the chat box. And I believe we're also going to be sending a follow-up email with this link to everyone after the presentation. And if you are already a Poster Guard member, you have access to this audit tool 24/7. You already have access to this. It's available through our members-only website on posterguard.com. And we do keep this information updated in real time for the Poster Guard customers, so it's something you can always check. If you ever have a poster question or want to see what the poster is supposed to look like, it's always there. So this link is going to give all of you access to the current information you need to check your posting stations. It's got all the federal and state information. It goes state by state and includes the names of all the mandatory posters, PDF images so you can see what they look like, and also the latest revision dates to make sure you have the latest versions. So we've covered the basics for federal and state law compliance, but there's actually a new trend that you also need to be aware of, and that is local posting compliance. There are a lot of cities and counties that now require businesses to post additional employee notices. So in addition to the federal and state postings that we've already gone over, these are over and above. And this is a fairly new trend we've been watching. And in my experience, I've found that most businesses aren't even aware that these exist, and they're not aware that they have locations that are affected, especially if you have multiple operations in multiple cities, across the country. So on this slide, this is a list of some of the bigger ones that have popped up over the last couple of years. It's not a complete list, and a few of these actually have multiple postings that are required. So I just wanted to point out, like the first one on this slide is San Francisco. Employers in San Francisco now have to post 7 additional notices on top of the federal and state postings. So that adds up to 28 postings when you count federal, California state, and San Francisco local postings. So that's quite a burden for San Francisco employers. And we're starting to see some other cities follow suit. Here, this slide just lists some more cities that require labor law posters on a local level. On this list, I wanted to point out Philadelphia because that's another city that has a lot of them. There are now 6 postings, I believe, that are required for Philadelphia employers on top of the Pennsylvania and the federal. And one question I get a lot when I'm talking about city and county postings is whether you have to post these local posters if they conflict with the information on your state law posters. Like, for example, if you have 2 different minimum wage rates, one under state law and one under city law. And the short answer is yes. You do have to post both versions. So the way that the laws work, states have the right to pass laws that are more generous to employees than federal law, and cities and counties have the right to pass laws that are even more generous than state law. So it's actually pretty common. A lot of times you'll have 3 different minimum wage rates, with the city wage being the highest. So in practice, as an employer, you're always required to follow the law that is the most generous to your employees, like the highest wage rate, but you still have to post all 3 notices, even though I know the information conflicts and it could be confusing. That is just a requirement. So this area, local posting compliance, is an area that's really growing quickly, and it's really important to stay on top of. In fact, our legal team here at Poster Guard is monitoring all of the cities and counties in the U.S., and almost daily we're analyzing new legislation and ordinances that are coming out, and determining whether they require mandatory postings and adding them to our offering. So it's really growing. We've actually had to add another lawyer to our legal team recently just to focus on these city requirements because of the growth that we're seeing in the area. And that's in terms of just the number of cities requiring new posters, and also the number of mandatory changes we're tracking for these posters. These posters change frequently, just like the state ones. You can look for your city requirements on that self-audit tool that I mentioned. You'll see on there, what's required as of today. But again, this area is changing all the time, so it's something you need to make sure that you're on top of. So the next step in our audit is making sure you have the correct versions of the postings, that you have the latest version of each poster required. Because, like I mentioned, these posting requirements change all the time as new and updated versions are issued by the various government agencies. I think this is by far the most challenging part of staying in compliance, and keeping up with the rapid rate of change. Monitoring the laws to see when the government issues new or updated posters, and then making sure you respond quickly by replacing them on your walls to maintain ongoing compliance. I think it's the most challenging aspect of posting compliance. And these labor law posting requirements change so frequently. We've actually seen the rate of change increase to an all-time high over the past few years. On average, we see about 150 state posting changes a year. And every time there's a posting change, we have to review the content of the change and the underlying laws to determine if it's a mandatory change or a non-mandatory change. And at least half of these changes do require a mandatory poster update or an immediate replacement of the posters. So that's about 75 mandatory changes a year nationwide. And that's just your basic federal and state posters. We're not even talking yet about the extra posters for industry-specific or government contractors, or even the city-county postings. And of course, those change just as frequently. So another problem adding to the complexity of posting compliance is that the government agencies don't notify businesses when these changes occur. So this can be really difficult because the posting requirements and the notices of changes can be buried on different agency website pages. And a lot of times we find that the old posters remain up and active on these website links, even though they're non-compliant, with no messaging that this poster is no longer compliant. You just have to come across a different page with the new poster and put 2 and 2 together and research it to figure it out. And sometimes these posting guidelines can be buried in statutes and regulations or even case law. They're not always just right there on the web page. So that makes it difficult to find posting changes, to know about them. It makes it difficult to interpret whether updates are mandatory or non-mandatory. Sometimes a poster will completely change, but if you dig in and do further research, it's a non-mandatory change and your old one is just fine. Other times, one word will change on a poster, but it's a significant word. It changes the gist of the law, and you have to immediately replace that poster. It's also even difficult on the websites alone to find out compliance deadlines for replacing the posters. They don't always coincide with the effective date of the law. Sometimes the poster comes out way before the effective date of the law. Sometimes it drags on and the poster isn't released by the government agency for weeks or even months after a law takes effect. So this is just a visual of the rate of posting changes affecting each state, and it shows how many federal and state poster changes employers have had to manage for each state over this time period. And this is something we update at the end of each calendar year, so this goes through the end of 2015. And as you can see, the states that are in red, those are the states with the most extreme level of change, and they experienced between 9 and 20 mandatory posting changes. And again, we're just talking about the mandatory changes down to the state level, not city or industry or anything like that. The states that are highlighted in orange had a high level of change with anywhere from 6 to 8 mandatory changes during this period. The ones in yellow had 3 to 5 mandatory changes. And then there are a few states in blue, and those only had 1 to 2 mandatory changes over this time period. Just a side note, because people ask me all the time, the record I've seen since I've been working in posting compliance is 14 changes in a single state in 1 year. But that's atypical, obviously. So now we're going to talk about the formatting of the posters. And this is an area of compliance that can be really tricky, whether you're handling your posting compliance on your own or working with a poster provider. So to be in compliance, you need to make sure that your posters meet all the requirements for size, font, color, and layout. And a lot of these posting laws have strict guidelines when it comes to the overall poster size. They might require 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17. We've seen that a lot too. They have requirements when it comes to the layout of the poster. You can't move things around. Minimum font sizes. A lot of them require 12-point font. And there are even some laws that have specific color requirements where you can't just print in black and white. You have to go full color. So of course, every posting law is different, so there's not one uniform standard to follow, even with font size. Some will specify, like I said, a minimum of 12-point font, and others will just say by law the font size has to be reasonable, and that sort of follows the standards for visual accommodations in general. So this kind of information can also be difficult to find. It's not always on the web page where you're going to find the posters. Sometimes the size, font, color, and layout requirements can be buried in an underlying statute or a regulation. That can also take some digging. But it's really important to do your research to make sure you have it right if you're doing it on your own. And if you're working with a poster provider, with a poster company, make sure you're asking about this and working with a partner that emphasizes compliance and that has a dedicated legal team that's handling all these decisions for you. Because, like I said, it can be kind of complicated. Also, you should be aware if you're looking at poster providers or working with poster providers that a lot of them will try to cut corners to save on printing costs by shrinking the posters below the minimum compliance guidelines just to fit everything onto one panel or one sheet, or even ignoring color requirements because color costs more to print. So that's also something you want to look for or ask about if you're choosing a poster provider. These are just some examples where you can see that the font has been reduced so drastically that it compromises compliance. And you can see at a glance on these images, you see the postings in the upper right on both of these examples. On the far upper right, that poster is the federal OSHA posting, and that one has specific size guidelines. So this is the size by law, but according to the government agencies that release these, that is considered reasonable. So when you look at that compared to all the other posters, you can see how all the other posters are so much smaller that you can barely read them, even if you're standing right in front of the poster. And even if a specific poster or posting law doesn't have an actual size font requirement, it still has to be legible from a reasonable distance to be compliant. So in other words, you can't shrink the font so small where employees have to get a magnifying glass to read it. And in most states, it really depends on how many posters there are, it's nearly impossible to get everything, all of the federal and all of the state onto one giant sheet without compromising compliance. Combination formats are great. Wall space I know is a premium, but it just becomes a problem when there are too many posters in a state to reasonably fit all the federal and the state together onto one panel. So ideally you would want all the federal posters on one combination panel and then all the state postings on a separate combination panel. unless you're in a state like California where even that won't fit. There's some states like, with 19, 20, 21 posters where, some of the posters are going to be some overflow. They just won't fit on these condensed formats. Another common mistake is not complying with foreign language posting requirements. And this applies to everyone, even if all of your employees are proficient in English. So there are actually 22 states right now, plus Washington, D.C., that require businesses to post certain postings in Spanish. So where you're required to post in both English and Spanish, regardless of your workforce demographics. So even if you don't have any Spanish-speaking employees on your staff, certain posters in these states have to be posted in both English and Spanish. A few states go even further and have requirements for other languages. We've seen up to 11 different languages: Russian, Japanese, Arabic, Mandarin, and Creole, I think, are the most common. And by the way, this applies on the city or local level as well. Some of the city posters have to be posted in 4 languages, even if all of your employees are proficient in English. Just a side note here, in Puerto Rico, all of the postings have to be displayed in Spanish. In these other 22 states, plus Washington, D.C., that I'm referring to, it's just certain postings, depending on each agency's requirements. So this is another area where you want to make sure you've done your research to determine if you have Spanish posting requirements. And again, of course, the government agencies don't make it easy. It's not always right there on the website where you find the poster. Sometimes this also takes some digging and some research. So if you're handling posting compliance on your own, just make sure you're aware of these requirements and looking for the Spanish requirements. If you're working with a poster compliance company, just make sure you ask about them. They are mandatory and should automatically be included if you're purchasing, if you're getting any kind of all-inclusive state poster set. So like I said, it's not all of the posters in these states. I just want to be clear. It's just certain ones in these states. And with the audit tool that we're providing, you'll be able to see this. You'll be able to see which ones have to be in English and Spanish. On the images, on the poster guard images, you're going to see all the posters that are required to be in Spanish are already printed right on the English versions of the posters. Since they're mandatory for everyone, they're just automatically there. Okay, so we've covered the foreign language requirements for everyone, for every employer. Now we're going to talk about some extra requirements that apply if you do have Spanish-speaking employees at any of your locations. So things change a little bit when it comes to your locations with a significant number of Spanish-speaking employees. First of all, when it comes to the federal poster, the federal combination poster, which has the 6 federal postings on it, if you have a significant number of Spanish-speaking employees who are not proficient in English, you need to post the federal combination poster in both English and Spanish. And the law does not define what significant number is. Different companies approach it differently and maybe look at, other similar laws under state and, city for guidance. I have some clients I work with who feel that if they just have 1 or 2 employees who don't speak English, they'll go ahead and post in Spanish. Others will use a 10% or even a 15% when trying to decide if that's a significant number. On a state level, there isn't a requirement that's written into law that says you have to post all of these posters in both English and Spanish, even if you do have a lot of Spanish-speaking employees who are not proficient in English. However, most employers who have to post the federal poster in Spanish, because they do have a significant number of Spanish-speaking employees, in that case, most of the time they choose to go ahead and post all of the state postings as bilingual as well. And that's just because it's a best practice. It would just be difficult to explain in any kind of dispute or lawsuit why there was a choice made that, certain posters were posted in Spanish, but we didn't take the extra step to post all of the mandatory notices in the language that we know our employees would understand. So it's just a best practice. There is one exception, and this is fairly recent. In Pennsylvania, employers who have Spanish-speaking employees do have to post all of the state posters in English and Spanish. Pennsylvania is the only exception right now. So now we're going to touch on E-Verify posting requirements. And this is a really important one if it applies to you, and I'm going to explain what that means and who's required to post these and what the actual posting requirements are. First, really quick, we wanted to do a quick poll just to see how many of you are participating in E-Verify. And I can maybe adjust the presentation a little bit around your answers. So if you could just take a moment and let us know if your company has any locations that are participating in E-Verify. Okay, so, well, it's kind of split. About 46, 47% are participating, whether it's required or voluntary, and about 44% are not participating. Actually, with E-Verify, you can tell by the nature of the question, in some cases it is voluntary, in some cases it is mandatory. Overall, right now, I think about a third of all participants are doing it voluntarily. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time on this. So first of all, for those of you who may not even be familiar with the program, E-Verify is an internet-based system, and it's operated by the government, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and it allows employers to check an employee's eligibility at the time of hire during the I-9 process. So through its database, it runs a cross-check with the DHS records and also with the Social Security Administration's records to determine if an employee is eligible to work in the U.S. And the reason we're even talking about E-Verify in today's webinar is, any employer who participates in E-Verify has mandatory posting requirements. And this is something that a lot of employers overlook, and there is enforcement around this. So who is required to participate? This slide shows a list of states where employers are currently required to participate, where it's mandatory for all employers. And these state laws evolve pretty quickly. There are actually a lot of other states right now with pending legislation to require E-Verify or to discontinue E-Verify in some cases. And also, I've included some states on here, if you see with the asterisk, and that's just because these states, technically, employers here are allowed to use an alternative, like a different system similar to E-Verify, but the requirements are so similar that most employers choose to use E-Verify. It's established, it works, and it just makes it easier to comply. So that's why I've lumped these all in with the other mandatory E-Verify states. Also, regardless of your state or your location, if you have federal government contracts, you're required to participate in E-Verify. Federal agencies are also required to participate, and public sector employers, which are government agencies or government employers, public sector employers that operate in the states that are listed here are also required to participate. So if you're in any of those categories, you're required to participate in E-Verify, and you're also required to post the mandatory E-Verify postings. In addition, if you choose to voluntarily participate in E-Verify, then the posting requirement is also mandatory. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but it is a mandatory posting requirement for voluntary participants. So what are the actual posting requirements for participants? There are actually two notices that are required. There's the E-Verify participation poster and the right to work poster. And both of these posters have to be displayed in English and Spanish. And that's true even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. It's true for everyone. And also, these posters have to be displayed where applicants and employees can see them. So most companies comply by posting these near an entrance. You'll usually see them at the entrance of a facility. This is just an image of a fully compliant E-Verify combination posting. So it has both of the required postings, and both of them are in English and Spanish. And just keep in mind, if you have multiple locations in different states, you might have some that need these posters and others that don't. So it depends on which ones participate in E-Verify. And also keep in mind, you should only be posting these where you actually participate in E-Verify. You don't want to just send these out to every single location you have. And the law is pretty clear on that. This indicates that you actually participate in the program. Okay, next we're going to touch on another area of compliance that gets overlooked a lot. And the key here is just remembering to display individual postings that might not be part of your main posting display station. So I'm going to explain what that means. Similar to the E-Verify posters, there are other posters, state and city posters, that have to be displayed separately, that should be apart from your big general labor law display station and your break rooms and everything. Typically, they need to be separate because they have to be posted near an entrance of your facility. And doing it in the break room isn't going to comply. A really good example of this, the most common, is with no smoking posters. And these are mandatory employee, labor law notices that have to be posted in 31 states right now, and then a lot of cities as well. And like the other posters, they have specific posting guidelines. They might have size, font, and color requirements, and then requirements for where to post, being near an entrance. Some of them even have specific statutory language on them. They might even cover electronic cigarettes. It all depends on your state or city. So just using a generic no smoking sign might not cut it, depending on the laws where your locations are. So since they have to be displayed near an entrance, they ideally should be printed separately from your large format employee posters if you're using large format. So you don't have to post the entire employee posting display at your entrance. You obviously want to avoid that if you can. So if you are working with a poster provider for your state posters, make sure that these are included. Ask for them, and preferably as separate postings. Unfortunately, I've found that a lot of poster providers don't include them. They either charge separately, or they just will cram them onto a large format panel because printing them separately is an added cost. There's printing materials and labor. But cost aside, you need to know about them and ask for them to make sure you're in complete compliance. Also, if you're handling posting compliance on your own, just make sure, especially with these, that you're following size, font, and color guidelines, and of course that you're putting them near an entrance. Another common mistake is not posting your industry-specific labor law notices. And there are a lot of industries, believe it or not, that have additional employee posting requirements beyond the regular federal and state ones that other businesses have to worry about. So the industries that have the most additional posting requirements, and right now we're just talking about employee-facing notices, by the way. We're not talking about the kind of posters you need for customers or patients or guests. So when it comes to these employee-facing posters, there are actually several additional ones that are required if you're in the restaurant industry, in healthcare, and also if you're a public sector employer. And these can be on a federal level, but especially on a state level. And most of the variations are on a state level, so you need to make sure you're checking your state laws for these extra requirements. And of course, every state is different. Some states require more than others. In fact, there are up to 15 additional employee notices for healthcare employers in some states. Healthcare, I think, has the most of these. So, and that even depends on what kind of equipment you have, what equipment you're operating in your healthcare facility and what kind of services you provide. But I'm not going to go into much more detail on any of these because I know they don't apply to everyone, but I just want to make sure you're aware of them. And it's not even limited to these three industries. These are just the ones that have the most. Also on the self-audit tool that we're providing, you will be able to see state by state the requirements for healthcare, restaurant, and public sector. So you can find out what your state requires if you're operating in any of these industries. So the next step in our audit is to make sure you have all of the required federal contractor postings if your business has any government contracts or federal funding. And this is an area that's really, it's another area that has really changed over the past few years. Enforcement is up, and there are more posters required than ever before for federal contractors. And when we talk about federal contractor posting requirements, it's not really an industry-specific issue because there are so many different types of businesses and different industries today that are covered by these requirements. Anything from financial institutions to auto dealerships to pharmaceutical companies. We're seeing more and more companies asking us about these posters. So when it comes to the actual postings you need, the specific posting obligations that you have typically depend on what types of contracts you have and with what government agencies, and sometimes it also depends on the amount of the contract value or funding that you're receiving. In some cases, the posters will be required for all government contractors, but in others it requires a contract in excess of $10,000, for example. This is a list of the most common postings that are required for federal contractors. We're not going to go into detail on the specifics for each one, but we do have a really good white paper on all of the posting laws for federal contractors, if to help you determine which one of these apply to you. So if you'd like that information, just send us an email, or you can request it in the chat feature, and we'll be happy to send that to you. We'll email it to you as a follow-up. I did want to highlight a few on this list that have had recent mandatory changes, and all of these are also covered in the self-audit tool, so you can take a closer look when you have time. But I wanted to just mention on this list, take a look at the last three that are listed here. The one, number 9, the federal contractor minimum wage poster, that one was first released in 2015, and then it already had a mandatory change in January 2016. So the version you should have up now for 2016 has the new minimum wage rate of $10.15 an hour. Number 10 on this list is the EEO is the law supplement. That also became a new mandatory requirement in January 2016. And this one's actually expected to have another mandatory change later this year. The OFCCP released a statement saying, it's still working on the final version with the EEOC. They're working together, and the poster is expected to be released, within the next several months. So that's something we're watching closely. But in the meantime, this temporary supplement is mandatory. Some people were confused because it said temporary, but it doesn't take away the fact that it's mandatory. And then the last one on this list, the pay transparency policy statement, that also became a new requirement in January of this year, 2016. There are a couple more postings, and these are required if your company has federal contracts for construction work. So I went ahead and listed those here on this slide. So one thing, I mentioned that some of the recent changes we've seen with these Fed contractor posters, but it's important to know that these posters change frequently. They change a lot more frequently than the regular federal posters. I believe there have been at least 15 mandatory federal contractor poster changes since 2009. And a lot of those are brand new posters that never existed before. And the reason is just, these laws typically arise out of executive orders, and the president can issue an executive order affecting federal contractors a lot more quickly than the legislative process that you'd have to go to for laws that affect private employers. So a lot of times they just pop up, and there's a real short window to get into compliance. I also wanted to mention the penalties for noncompliance with these Fed contractor postings are even more severe than what we already talked about for the regular federal and state posters. If a business doesn't comply with the federal contractor posting requirements, it's not only steep fines and penalties, but you can also lose your government contract or funding, and that's typically written right into the contract that the contract is considered breached, or they can be suspended or canceled just because of noncompliance with the posting requirements. So now that we've covered what posters you need, I wanted to talk about where and how to display them. I get so many questions on this. And this is another common violation, and when it comes to not having enough postings throughout your facility. So when you're auditing your posting compliance, you need to make sure you've got the proper number of posting display stations to satisfy the posting requirements. So all of the posting statutes have their own specific statutory language when it comes to where to post. But the general rule, the gist of all the laws when you take them together, is that the posters have to be displayed in prominent and conspicuous locations throughout your business where they are accessible to all employees. So in a small office, you might be able to satisfy this requirement by posting in one location, like an employee break room, if you know that all your employees have access to it and use it regularly or frequently. In most cases, though, you're going to need more than one posting display site to make sure that all your employees have regular access to them. And the number of posting display sites that you're going to have in each one of your facilities really depends on the logistics and how accessible the posters are to your employees. So, to make sure you're in compliance, you should definitely look for highly visible areas or high traffic areas that, that are accessible to all your employees. In a large facility, this could mean posting near, every employee entrance, an employee break room, or, if you have a locker room, an employee locker room. If you have an HR department, you want to consider posting near your HR offices. Another idea, if you have a lot of employees that physically, punch a time clock, would be to hang them near your time clock stations. So, it really just depends on the layout of your facility. Unfortunately, there's not a magic number or formula in the regulations or, provided by the agencies. So, I've had some clients in high-rise buildings who have needed to post on every floor because there isn't like a main entrance that all the employees share. And then others where there's just one central point of entry and, they were okay with one posting set even though they did have multiple floors in the building. So it's really specific to your facility. But you just need to make sure, just think of all your affected employees and make sure they're in areas that they regularly frequent. Also, you need to be aware of applicant area posting requirements. And this is an area that a lot of people just aren't that familiar with, but it's really important because with an audit or, if an inspection officer comes in, they really don't have to go that far to see if you're in compliance when it comes to these. So a lot of employers don't even realize this, but out of the 6 mandatory federal postings that we covered, 4 of those have to be displayed in an area where applicants can view them. And those are the EEOC poster, FMLA, USERRA, and the EPPA postings. There could be others too, if they apply to your business, like E-Verify we talked about, and the no smoking if you're in a city or state where those are required. Okay, our final step in the compliance audit has to do with your off-site workers, your employees who don't regularly report to a physical facility where your posters are. So when it comes to your remote workers and telecommuters, posting compliance presents a very unique challenge. And I work with a lot of businesses, and it's never the same. No 2 companies are alike. Some now have thousands of remote workers, so it's could be quite a burden. But this is also an area that's getting more and more attention just because of the ongoing, continuing trend toward employing telecommuters. And for years we got questions where people wanted to send the physical posters to their employees and who worked at home, and we kind of laughed, like trying to picture posters up on the bathroom walls or someone's refrigerator. And that's not required. I mean, you could do it that way, but that's not required. And of course, that especially could get difficult when you have hundreds or thousands of home-based workers. But it is kind of confusing because by law, you are required to provide all of your employees with these notices. All your employees are entitled to the same notices that are posted on your walls. But the law doesn't tell you exactly how to do that when it comes to your home-based employees or your remote workers. The laws do tell you that you're required to communicate the information, but they don't tell you that you have to use a certain solution or format, whether it has to be paper or electronic. But there are some recent opinion letters and even court cases where employers have sent notices out electronically, and the courts have said, yes, that is a good alternative, that is compliant, it makes sense, you got the notices to them, and that's what counts. That's the intent of the law. So there are a few options for getting the information out to your employees, but if your employees communicate with your office via email or internet, if they regularly communicate electronically with the office, I recommend using an online system, some kind of digital solution. Ideally, a system that sends electronic notifications directly to the remote worker, one that provides online access to the remote worker 24/7 so they could see, view the posting images when they, in their time, one that sends updates when mandatory changes occur, and also ideally one that tracks the employee's acknowledgments, with the date when they viewed the postings. And these acknowledgments are critical. I've seen just in so many cases in my experience, and it's usually within employee handbook policies, where once you're in an employee dispute or lawsuit, employees will always say, oh, I never got that notice or policy, or I didn't know about that update, no one told me. So this way you just have all the proof and tracking to show that you got the information to them and they did read it and acknowledge it, that you did your job. There are some other good options for getting the information out to remote workers, but This kind of solution, I think, is just the most airtight approach to compliance, and make sure that it makes sure that your offsite employees, are always kept current of the latest posting changes, and that you have that tracking in case there's ever a dispute about accessibility. Okay, well that is everything for the 10 audit steps. But before we move on to the final portion of the webinar and questions, we thought it would be interesting to check back with you on the question we asked at the beginning of the presentation, just to get a feel for your confidence level in terms of how confident you are that your posters are compliant and complete now that you've been through the 10 audit steps. So if you would just take a quick moment. Okay, so just a slight shift, a little bit more of you have now kind of dropped to somewhat confident. I do want to make sure, hopefully you may be realizing like, oh, we have some more requirements that we weren't aware of, but hopefully you feel confident, 100% confident that you now have the information at least to get started, the information and the tools that you need to get into compliance. That was the intent. So one final thing, we did invite all of you to send in photos if you wanted us to do a live audit of your posting station at the end of the presentation. And we did get some really good submissions, a lot of interesting ones with a lot of things we could talk about. I did want to mention that we got several that were just too hard to read because of photo quality, and we are going to be following up with you directly. If you still want us to help audit your posting station, we will be reaching out to you as a follow-up. I did go ahead and choose a couple of examples to share with you that I had a chance to kind of zoom in on and take a look at before the presentation. So, I wanted to be able to point out some issues that I think might apply to a lot of you, the common things that I see when I'm doing posting audits. So I do have a couple of examples to share. I also had a chance to get our creative team to block out the name of the poster provider, obviously out of courtesy. So that's why you see the big red blocks on the image. Also, of course, if these are yours, don't worry, I'm not going to mention anyone's name or your company's name. But I picked, and I know this is blurry, but I'm going to, hopefully the points I make, they'll be good takeaways for you, even though you can't actually read the content of the poster. So I picked a California submission because that's the state with the highest level of enforcement and also where I typically see the most mistakes. This particular poster has all of the California posters and all of the federal posters on one giant panel. And so, like we said, the first thing I noticed is that the posters have been reduced significantly in order to fit on this kind of format. And without actually measuring it and looking at the font, I can see that this probably compromises compliance in terms of font size and accessibility. So that's one thing. Also, I can see immediately they're missing an important poster, and this one's noticeable because it's a big one, both in size. The poster itself is a large poster, and also in terms of importance for California. And that is the industry-specific wage order for California. That's a mandatory poster. Depends on your industry, and I don't see it here, and it's pretty large. Usually it wouldn't even fit on a panel. It's usually you would see it separately. I also noticed, just at a quick glance, that all of the postings on here are only in English, and it's missing the mandatory Spanish translations that are required in California. So in California, and you can see this on the audit tool, there are at least 2 postings that have to be posted in English and Spanish, even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. And I don't see any Spanish translations here, so those are missing. And then finally, this is a good example where you can barely see it right in the middle of the poster. There's a little no smoking sign. It's got the circle with the slash through it. And this is just a good example where it's been printed on this large format poster instead of a separate smaller poster. And since the law requires it to be posted near an entrance, this would force you to post this entire panel near an entrance unless you had it also separately on a smaller piece. Also, the smoking symbol on this poster doesn't appear to comply with color requirements. This is one in California where the symbol itself has color requirements, and the black, I believe that whole entire symbol needs to be red. There are some other picky things on this, but those are the major points that I think tie into what we've covered today. And then I have one more, and this is for New Jersey. And the first thing I see here is that this posting station is missing federal posters. They're not combined on this large format poster with the state posters, so that's good. But I would expect to see the federal posters hanging right next to this. So maybe this person just didn't include them in the photo, but if not, it is really important that you immediately get and post the missing federal postings that we talked about. The other thing I see immediately is this E-Verify printout. It's a separate sheet of paper, and it's kind of hanging to the left of the poster. First of all, just as a general rule, never cover up any portion of your posters, even if it's other posters, if it's on the bulletin board and someone's just an employee kind of stuck something on top of it. I've actually seen employers get in trouble for this and on sites with the EEOC and the DOL. Also, the E-Verify poster, that little sheet of paper, is incomplete. Remember, this one has to be, it's 2 posters that are required, the E-Verify and the Right to Work, and both of them have to be in English and Spanish. So I only see E-Verify, and I only see it in English. Also, when I see E-Verify in New Jersey, I'm just assuming this employer is participating voluntarily because it's not required in New Jersey, or they're participating because they're a federal contractor. So if you're posting this because you're a federal contractor, I just wanted to make sure you had that heads up about the other federal contractor posters, up to 13 additional posters depending on your business and your types of contracts. Also, just the biggest thing to me, and I had time to kind of zoom in and look, there are some major posters that are missing for New Jersey. I don't see the required workers' comp poster. I don't see the child labor schedule of hours, and I don't see the conscientious employee protection poster. And that one actually is supposed to be in English and Spanish. So those are missing. And then also, New Jersey requires an employee no smoking poster, but maybe, hopefully, that one is just posted separately and it's near an entrance. So I just couldn't see it in the photo. Okay, well that wraps it up. I hope you found this presentation to be helpful and informative. I know we went over a lot of legal requirements and details, but there is a lot to share when it comes to these laws, and it's really important to get it right when it comes to all the ins and outs of posting compliance. Before we go to questions, I just want to remind you, take advantage of that self-audit tool, and feel free to reach out to us here if you'd like more help with your specific posting requirements. So now I'm going to turn it back over to our host to see if we have any questions or that we've gotten in.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, I second that. Please use the posting audit tool that we sent out. And we did cover a lot of information. If you would like a copy of the slides, please let us know in the chat, and we will ensure that you receive these slides and the recording after the presentation. And all those who did indicate that they would like the white paper, we are emailing you that as well. So don't worry, we will follow up with you after the presentation today. And yes, we did receive a lot of questions. Because we are a couple minutes after the hour, we only have time for 1 or 2. The first question, let's see, the first question we will get to today is from Laura. And she says, do we have to post applicant posters if we only accept applications online?
Okay, that's a good question. If you have any kind of online applicant tracking system and you're accepting applications online, whether it's the only way you do it or not, you first of all, you need to have some kind of electronic access to these posters so that the applicant, if an applicant can go through the whole application process online and submit an application, there should be some kind of click here to view the mandatory federal applicant posters. So you need to cover that. If you're only doing, I think the question is, if you're only doing it online, do you still need to post the physical posters? And really, in reality, if you're sure that applicants, have no physical access to your facilities, that would work. But in reality, if you have a room for interviews, or if you bring applicants in to your HR office, or you do any kind of pre-employment testing, even though you only take the initial applications online, you would still need to post for those interactions. So in your HR offices or whatever. And then just don't forget that the posters that are required for applicants are also still required for your employees. So like E-Verify, if you only accept applicants online and you've got your digital access to an E-Verify poster, you still need to have it up in your business because employees, you have to make that one visible to employees as well. And that's true for all the federal posters that apply to applicants.
Okay, sounds good. Laura, I think that should answer your question for you. Moving on to one final question for today. We have one from Doug. He asks, we have salespeople who work in the field but occasionally come into the office for meetings. Are they considered remote workers for posting purposes?
Okay, I think I understand the gist of the question. And this, of course, like a lot of things, is sort of a gray area, but I do have some guidelines that I can share. So I think the question is really, at what point are your physical posters, enough? Like if an employee comes in, twice a year, do you need to do some kind of, digital solution for them or is it enough that they come into the office and see the posters twice a year? And there's no black and white on this, but we do have a couple of good opinion letters from the DOL and the EEOC where a business asked, the closest we have for this is a business asked, I have an employee who comes in once a week for meetings. Is that sufficient, or do we need to provide the posters electronically? And the agencies said, once a week is sufficient. So just, this is what lawyers do. You kind of take what you have and then, build guidelines around it. As a best practice sort of safety net, I usually tell people if an employee is coming in, 2-3 times a month, you're probably okay with your wall posters. If it's less frequently than that, then I would go ahead and supplement it with some kind of electronic solution, just to make sure, because really it comes down to the definition of, frequent and regular access to the posters, and it hasn't been defined any better than that, and other than that once a week question. So if it's once a week, or 2 or 3 times a month, you're probably okay with just the physical wall posters.
Okay, that sounds good. Great. Thank you, Ashley. That is all the time we have for questions today, but I thank you everyone for participating in the chat and being on the webinar with us for the full hour. Before we sign off today, I do want to invite you to next month's webinar. Our next webinar by ComplyRight is on May 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It is 5 performance management scenarios, navigating everyday encounters for greater results. You may remember Mike Haberman from our past webinars, and he will be joining us again talking about these scenarios. If you want to join us for an in-depth review of common management scenarios and what you can do to enhance their outcomes. Whether you're a new manager or a seasoned HR professional, you'll get practical guidance on how to navigate the highs and lows of employee performance. And you can sign up for this webinar on complyright.com/webinars. We all agree that this was an informative session today, and I thank all of you for staying on with us during the hour. Thank you again, Ashley, for presenting, and everyone have a great day.